Most of us now spend around 90% of our lives indoors, and a growing share of that is in rooms with no real window at all, lit by flat artificial light that does nothing for the body clock natural daylight is meant to set. But a company in Italy has built a ceiling panel that changes that. CoeLux came out of a university physics lab, and what it makes is a fixture only centimeters thick. It recreates the sun and a deep blue sky so convincingly, the brain reads it as a real opening to the outdoors. It has no skylight cut into the roof and no daylight coming in from anywhere. If it holds up the way the people standing under it describe, it turns the windowless basement, the interior office, and the buried apartment into spaces that feel open to the sky. We are going to get inside one of these panels, work out how a few millimeters of plastic convinces a brain built to judge distance, and whether the daylight it fakes is real enough to matter to your body. The cost of cutting people off from natural light turns out to be enormous. In the United States, major depression now carries an annual economic burden of more than $300 billion. Meaningful share of that traces to seasonal affective disorder and the broader effect of living under poor light. This suppresses serotonin, pushes daytime melatonin up, and pulls the body's daily rhythm out of step. The frustrating part is that we already know what helps. Light therapy that mimics real outdoor light eases the symptoms in something like 40 to 60% of cases. Ordinary indoor lighting just cannot do that job. A fluorescent tube or a flat LED panel throws out a wall of even glary light with no direction to it, no sense of depth, and none of the spectral shift the sky moves through across a day. So, the brain never reads it as daylight, and the body never responds to it as daylight. Convincing a brain that has spent a lifetime judging distance, and a body that has spent one reading the sky, takes 3 separate tricks working at once. Recreating the actual feel of the sun and sky indoors, rather than just brightening a room, is the problem CoeLux set out to solve. The company grew out of a research project at the University of Insubria in Como, Italy, led by the experimental physicist Paolo di Trapani. His lab spent more than a decade studying how the atmosphere bends, scatters, and colors sunlight. He even staged those effects in a touring exhibition before any of it became a product. That work turned into a spin-off in 2009 and drew substantial public and private research funding. It reached the market in 2014, where it picked up a major lighting industry award and the attention of MIT Technology Review almost immediately. What it does rests on 3 pieces of engineering working together. The first is the light source itself, a dense array of high-brightness LEDs tuned to match the spectrum of real sunlight and focused into a tight, directional beam. It behaves like a single sun overhead, rather than a glowing panel. The second is the optics that sit in front of it. There is a custom lens system that lines the light rays up parallel to one another, which quietly defeats the cues your eyes use to judge distance. When you look up, your eyes try to focus on the source and find nothing close to settle on. Stand under one and the effect is genuinely disorienting, because every instinct tells you there is open sky overhead, while a hand on the light switch says there is not. The third piece is where the sky comes from, and it is the cleverest part. The atmosphere looks blue, because air molecules are far smaller than the wavelengths of light passing through them. They scatter short blue wavelengths much more strongly than long red ones, an effect called Rayleigh scattering. CoeLux recreates that inside a thin, transparent sheet, seeded with a fine, carefully spaced dispersion of titanium dioxide nanoparticles, which bend light the same way the sky does. That, in effect, compresses 10 kilometers of atmosphere down into a few millimeters of plastic. Get the spacing of those particles right, and the panel glows an even natural blue, with the sun's beam cutting through it and casting hard-edged shadows that even carry the faint blue tint real shadows have outdoors. On top of the optics, the newer systems add a layer of control. A smart sky mode shifts the color and intensity through the day, from a warm, low sun in the morning to a bright, cool midday with a deep blue sky overhead. It ties into building and smart home systems through standard protocols like DALI and Kasambi, or a phone app, so it can follow the real time of day on its own. CoeLux now sells this in several forms, from the large flagship fixtures that need a deep ceiling cavity down to slimmer recessed units with a downlight barely bigger than a spotlight. What every one of them is really selling is the same effect: a windowless room that the brain, and to a degree the body, treats as if it has a sky in the ceiling. That illusion is convincing enough that the obvious question is how it stacks up against the alternatives, and here CoeLux has one real disadvantage worth stating plainly. The light it makes is not real sunlight. The systems that do deliver real sun, built by firms like Parans in Sweden or Himawari in Japan, mount tracking mirrors or lenses on the roof and pipe daylight down into the building through bundles of optical fiber. But that approach carries every weakness of anything bolted outside and moving. The collectors track the sun on motors that wear out, the fiber loses light over distance, the roof has to be cut open to route it all, and the moment a cloud rolls over or the sun goes down, the system simply stops. CoeLux trades that real sunlight away to get rid of all of it. Because it is solid state and sealed indoors, it has no moving parts, nothing exposed to weather, and it runs the same at midnight in a basement as it does at noon, drawing only around 340 watts for an entire artificial sky. That is less than a typical hairdryer. At the cheap end of the market sits the ordinary option, a flat LED ceiling panel for a few $100s. A single high-end unit runs past $60,000 before installation, while the slimmer models still land in the low tens of thousands. The honest way to read that price is not as a light fixture, but as real estate. A roughly $40,000 installation that makes a windowless basement or a dark interior floor feel like a room with a sky can turn space. Nobody wants to occupy into space. People will pay to lease or live in. Across a whole building, that shift in value is what the cost is really being weighed against. That argument only works if the building itself is changing, and it is, which is a big part of why this is landing now rather than staying a curiosity. Cities are getting denser, and the floor plates inside modern buildings are getting deeper, which strands more and more of the floor area in the middle, far from any outside wall, and reliant entirely on artificial light. Buildings already consume roughly 40% of the world's energy and a large share of electricity in developed countries. As net zero construction gains momentum, it's steadily phasing out the old, inefficient lighting these interiors once relied on. What has shifted alongside that is the science. Researchers have identified a set of cells in the retina, separate from the ones we actually see with, that respond mainly to blue light and feed straight into the brain's master clock. They're the mechanism by which daylight sets your sleep, alertness, and mood. They're also why the question we opened with, whether fake daylight is real enough to matter to your body, is starting to tip toward yes. They are exactly what a flat indoor light fails to reach, and what the changing blue spectrum of a system like this is built to trigger. That has moved the case for putting real feeling daylight deep inside a building from a comfort argument to a measurable health one. For all that, CoeLux has real ground to cover before it turns up in ordinary buildings. The first obstacle is the one already obvious from the price, and much of it comes down to how the panels are made. Spreading those titanium dioxide nanoparticles evenly through the optical sheet is delicate, small batch work. If the particles clump, they create optical flaws and muddy the color of the sky, and the high-power LED engines need careful thermal management to keep the color from drifting over time. Bringing the cost down means moving off that hand-built process onto a continuous, automated way of producing the panels, something that could cut the price of the scattering layer dramatically and pull it closer to a high-end commercial light. The second problem is depth. The flagship fixtures need close to a meter of clearance above the ceiling to house the light engine and the optics that create the illusion of distance. Even the slimmer mainstream model wants around 25 centimeters. A typical office ceiling has only 30 to 45 centimeters to give. Fitting it into a normal building without major structural work depends on flatter optics that can fold the same illusion into under 10 centimeters, which is still an open engineering problem rather than a solved one. And the history here is not encouraging, because companies trying to sell daylight have come unstuck before. Parans, the Swedish firm piping real sunlight through fiber, was delisted from its stock market in 2021 after years of financial strain. And Himawari in Japan, going since the late 1970s, never broke out of a narrow niche. CoeLux sidesteps their core weakness by keeping everything indoors and solid state, but it still has to win over the same cautious construction and real estate world that never fully bought the idea, and it has to do it while the wider building and solar sector is seeing a wave of insolvencies. What would settle it is hard proof of return, clinical and financial, that the space and the well-being it unlocks genuinely pay back the cost. Even so, the direction of travel is clear enough. CoeLux has been pushing steadily towards slimmer, cheaper formats, with linear units around 12 centimeters thick and a recessed downlight not much larger than a normal ceiling spot. Both of these designed to drop into standard ceilings instead of demanding a custom cavity. Rather than selling one fixture at a time, the company is working its way into the architectural supply chain, training the lighting designers and integrators who handle the precise alignment these systems need, and tying the product into building management systems that sync it to the real position of the sun outside. If you are watching this and wondering when you can have one, the honest answer is that you already can, through specialist installers, as long as the budget stretches to it. The wait is not for availability, but for price. The technology is following the path most optics-heavy hardware does, getting flatter, cheaper, and easier to fit with each generation, and the version that eventually reaches an ordinary home will likely be a long way from the room-sized luxury installations going in today. Step back from the optics, and what CoeLux really represents is the breaking of an old rule, the one that says a room has to sit against an outside wall to feel open to the sky. The price is still steep, and the engineering still has to shrink before most of us will live under one. But the falling costs, the denser way we are building, and the growing evidence that daylight genuinely shapes our health all point in the same direction. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to stay ahead of where home technology is going, subscribe and stick around, because we will keep covering the most interesting developments in this space as they arrive.